We live in a world of judgment. Think about it. Even the shows on TV that we love to watch are full of judgment. You have Judge Maybelline, Judge Joe Brown, and my favorite, Judge Judy. The biggest show on TV for the last 15 years even has a panel of judges, American Idol. It's crazy how judgment just oozes out of us and we enjoy watching others getting judged. Something we see in movies and shows a lot is called a trope. And a trope is a concept or stereotype that the audience understands. For instance, the hero gets the girl, the bomb always has a timer, and the bad person is actually a good person. Let me give you examples of that one. The Grinch. Turns out dude was misunderstood and just lonely. Steve, the bully from Stranger Things, who turns out to be a nice guy. And Severus Snape from Harry Potter series. Turns out he was for Harry the whole time. These people fit the stereotype, then they bust it wide open. But tropes just don't happen in the movies. We do it all the time. The nerdy, awkward guy who slays calculus, we naturally assume he gets a fail when it comes to sports. The guy who lives in the gym, he probably doesn't slay at calculus. And the girl with the perfect clothes, perfect Instagram, and perfect everything, because she has everything going for her, we assume she's probably a mean girl, right? And why do we assume the worst? Well, I think it's two things. Classifying people makes things easier. Our brains put people in categories as a way of keeping things neat and organized. And number two, we've seen this movie before, right? We know how this story goes because many times before, that's exactly how it's gone with the same kind of characters. And that's what we see in a story in the Old Testament about a woman named Rahab. And let me set the scene. Thousands of years ago, God's people, the Hebrews, were slaves to the Egyptians. And through Moses, their leader, God set the Israelites free and sent them on a journey to a new land that would become their new home. And because God had promised the Israelites freedom in this new land, they referred to it as the Promised Land. The trip to go to the Promised Land was epic. They were chased by the Egyptian army. They received the Ten Commandments. God miraculously gave them food and water, just to name a few of these crazy things that happened. And oh yeah, the journey also took 40 years. So needless to say, this was not your typical road trip. And with all they experienced, the Israelites were ready to finally be home. But once they arrived in the Promised Land, they discovered there was one small problem. 7 entire nations already lived there. So Joshua, the new leader of the Israelites after Moses, sent a couple of spies across the border to do some recon work in the city of Jericho, located in the land that God had promised them. But the spies were discovered and had to go to plan B, which was to hide. And a resident of the city, a woman named Rahab, offered her home as a place to hide until the spies could sneak out. And that's where we're going to pick up. But someone told the king of Jericho, some Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy out the whole land. Rahab had hidden the 2 men, but she replied, yes, the men were here earlier, but I didn't know where they were from. They left the town at dusk, as the gates were about to close. I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch up with them. So Rahab not only hid the Israelite spies, but also lied to protect them, probably risking her life. This was an incredibly brave and generous thing to do for people she met just 5 minutes before. And this noble act instantly made her a hero in this story. Great, right? But the Bible also provides another detail about Rahab. Let's back up a few verses. So the 2 men, the spies, set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there that night. Did you catch that? Rahab was a prostitute. Not exactly the kind of person you'd expect to be a Bible hero, and yet that's exactly what she was. The author makes it a point to tell us how she made a living, and her story didn't end there. Later we learn the Hebrews eventually conquered the city of Jericho, and because of Rahab's brave act, Joshua spared her land and her family's lives. But that's not the last we hear of her. More than 1,000 years later, Rahab's name appears in the Bible, this time in a genealogy, which is kind of like a family tree. And this isn't just any family tree, it's a list of names that documents the lineage of Jesus. It says Matthew 1:5, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Now, why wouldn't Matthew just skip over her name and hope that no one noticed? Simply put, to shatter our categories, to show that what we assume about others isn't always true. And this holds such a big truth for us. God doesn't judge people by appearances. He doesn't determine our value based on what we do or say. He doesn't limit our potential to our worst choices. Instead, He looks at who we truly are, who He made us to be. He sees what is possible in our whole story, not just our now. And there's so much more to who you are than the assumptions others make about you. And because of that, I want to challenge you to embrace two big ideas in one single phrase. Assume the best and trust God with the rest. Assume the best. Not all judgments have to be negative. You can choose to look at people, even people who make decisions you disagree with, and choose to assume good things about them. Being cynical is a miserable, unhappy, and lonely way of life. It's like professional hater. Being cynical doesn't happen overnight. It grows over time. One of the best ways to avoid becoming a lifetime hater is to choose over and over again to assume the best in people around you. Trust God with the rest. This is the part where you get to hand over your hater membership card and let God be God. Because when you assume the best about someone, it doesn't mean that they won't let you down. It doesn't mean they'll magically make great decisions. They're people, so odds are they're gonna mess up. But remember, what you see is just a part of their story. Your job isn't to manage the 10% of their story you can see. Your job is to let God manage the 90% you can't see. God knows a person's past, He knows what they're going through today, and He knows what can happen in their future. All you know is that they were annoying at lunch. So doesn't it make sense to trust the one who knows the entire story? Trusting God lets you move from being a hater to knowing it's handled. I bet the people who knew Rahab in Jericho thought she was a lost cause. But God envisioned something bigger and better. He used her past to communicate a powerful message to a group of first century readers of the book of Matthew, but also to millions of others in the thousands of years since. And that was a message of hope and possibility, no matter what your past looks like. So as you head to life groups today, I want you to think about who is it in your life that needs you to assume the best and to trust God with the rest.